You're listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast brought to you by Nottinghamshire Live. Hello, welcome to Garibaldi Red, and as ever during an international break we like to catch up with a former Forest player or manager, and this week we're delighted to be joined by former Red striker Simon Cox, who recently announced his retirement, so we're going to hear what he's up to these days. Simon, hello, are you well?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Yes, good, thanks. Good. Like we were saying before, you just announced your retirement, which kind of made me think, you'd be a good guest. I guess it's not an easy decision to call time on something you've dedicated yourself to for so long. Was there a particular trigger moment that made you think, it's time's up for me, or was it just a gradual thing? What made you finally decide to retire?
I think it was more on the basis that I came back from Australia. I sort of tried to find another club here, and it wasn't the case, which is fine. And then I just decided that it was probably time. I just I started to write my retirement speech, and I always said that when I did write that, if I felt that I was doing it at the wrong time or I felt sad by writing it, I wouldn't have retired. I would have just tried to carry on as much as I could. I obviously had the mindset I would try and play until I was like 40 years old, but sometimes the mind and the body just doesn't allow that.
Yeah, you're only like 34, is that right? You 34. Didn't fancy, Nathan Tyson's been on here for quite a few times. He's still going at almost 40 for Chesterfield. You didn't fancy trudging around in like National League South or the Ryman League or something just to stay in a dressing room then?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did, but then I kind of didn't as well. So I just sort of thought to myself, some people don't get to retire on their own wishes, and it was something I always sort of wanted to do. I always wanted to go out on my terms and free of injury. I've got young kids, so I wanted to be able to be walking around with them, go to the park and whatever. And I didn't want to be somebody who be walking around and the knees start hurting or the ankles don't work anymore. And it just wasn't that sort of. I didn't have that mindset to continue for the next sort of 3 or 4 years and potentially get a lot more injuries. And that wasn't something I had in my mind to do. If
we look at your career, I mean, you played international football for Ireland. You played in the Premier League for West Brom. How did you end up at Forest? You came at an interesting time, which I'm sure we'll touch on, but what's the story behind coming to the City Ground?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It was a very interesting time. There were a lot of changes happening around the football club at the time, and I was sort of surplus to requirements at Forest, at West Brom, because of the people that were going in there at the time. And I had a choice of 2 clubs, Forest and Blackburn, and where I was living, obviously in Birmingham. Nottingham's only around the corner, so it was nice to be able to first and foremost live where I was and commute every day. Ultimately in the end, I ended up buying a house in Nottingham, which was nice. But yeah, that was sort of how it came about, really. Surplus to requirements at West Brom, and I had a choice of 2 clubs, so it was nice.
So you come into Forest, you're one of the first signings of the Fawaz era, which was just mad, having had so many people on here. But you saw the very early days of it. I mean, what were your first impressions of the club? Did you get a sense that they knew what they were doing, basically, or not?
Well, I signed under Omar.
Okay.
Omar was his cousin,
one of the family, yeah.
Yeah, so I signed under Omar, and got walked around the training ground, got taken to the stadium, and listen, you can tell that it's a big football club. You can tell the history's there. You get that sense of feeling that this is a football club that is kind of like a sleeping giant. It very much shouldn't be where it is, but is where it is for a number of reasons. And it just needs a bit of guidance. I was kind of hoping that I would walk in and all of a sudden there would be a lot of changes. And the changes that I was expecting to be made weren't in terms of ownership. It wasn't managers. It was players coming in. You sort of saw the potential funding that Omar and Fawaz could potentially have, and you're expecting top quality players to walk in the door, and there were some, but then there were some not so good ones as well. So that was a bit of an issue, but that's football.
What was the dressing room like when you go in there? Because obviously there's players from the Nigel Doughty era when things were a bit ropey financially at the end. Then there's a big influx of players, including yourself. Was there good chemistry, or was it a bit tough to kind of get that bond going initially?
No, it was a good dressing room. It was a dressing room that was probably, when I walked in, it was very excited, obviously because of the new ownership, the potential for good quality players to be walking through the door. So it was an excited dressing room, but it was one that had seen a lot of tough times and just needed picking up a little bit. So it, like I say, it was a nice dressing room to walk into. It wasn't a tough dressing room. It was, had some good quality in there already, which, we tried to add to, but got a little bit unstuck somewhere along the line.
Yeah, was O'Driscoll the first manager? You didn't work under Cotterill, did you?
No, Sean was my first manager, yeah.
What was Sean? I mean, Sean's been on here, and he, seems like a really good guy, and probably didn't know exactly what he was getting into the way he went. The team wasn't doing too badly when he went at all. I mean, what was he like to play for? Yeah,
he was fine. He, I sort of liken him to like one of your nicest school teachers, really. So he basically, I walked into the dressing room, or walked into the training ground when I was being shown around. I sat down with him and Rob Kelly, and it was, a nice chat. It was, this is where we're going to play. This is the way I want to play. This is how I do my day-to-day stuff, and this is what I want from every player. So, he set his stall out quite nicely, and it was something that I was happy with. As you pointed out, we weren't really in a bad way when he got the sack, but the way that Fawaz was, the way he was when he took over, it was very trigger happy, and it doesn't matter whether we were, 8th, 9th, 4th, 3rd, or 2nd. I sort of feel that he could have been, unfortunate and losing his job no matter where we were in the league, which is a bit unfortunate.
How do players respond to managerial changes like that, especially at Forest? There was such a high turnover. Does it become water off a duck's back, or do players kind of get a bit annoyed by it? What's the response in general?
Well, you do get annoyed by it because there's never really a chance of being consistent, and like you said, but because we were in a decent place at the time, you kind of don't understand it either. But then as a player, you get this sort of the difference of opinion, because if you're playing under Sean, he's the best manager in the world because you're playing every week. But if you're not playing, he's the worst manager. So somebody else coming in gives you, a bit of a reprieve, and you're able to start again and see if somebody else likes you and plays you. So it's there is a little bit of a sort of touch and go depending on how you feel the manager's treated you before, really.
So the next manager is Alex McLeish, who seems a different kind of character to Sean. I think he would have played different football. It's probably a bit more direct. I remember. I don't know if that didn't. I guess it was more direct. I guess that didn't suit you at all. So it's hard to remember. He wasn't there for long, but that must have been an interesting period then, a very short period.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting because, I mean, anybody who's been to the training ground knows the sort of layout of the training ground, and especially the building. So, we were in the dressing room at the time, and we'd obviously seen on TV or whatever, or been told that he was being appointed. So, players were a little bit like, okay, so we kind of know what way he wants to play. He's, very direct. It's normally a big guy up front, and it's sort of kick it up to him and get round it, and there's not very much passing around. So it's so we understood that, but I think my sort of thing was every player understands, or every player gets a sort of idea of what the manager is going to be like in their first meeting, and at the training ground you've got the dressing room in the far corner, and then you've got a meeting room that is just outside of the dining room, and very adequate meeting room, which is where every manager does his pre and post match stuff, training videos, all that sort of stuff. And Alex McLeish came into the dressing room, and he held his first meeting in the dressing room, which was fine, is no problem. But we were in our environment, and we needed him to be in his, and that's where he would have stood up and been his presence and everything else. But I mean, his first meeting just didn't fill you with a lot of confidence, really. It was one of those where I just looked at it and thought, kind of feel like you've taken a job that you didn't really want to take, and it's doesn't really sort of suit you personally, and as it was, it didn't really. It wasn't there very long.
Is there a point where you realise pretty quickly then that this isn't going to work out? And then how do you respond to a group of players when a manager's probably not going to be around for long? Because managers can be thrown under the bus, and sometimes I guess players can do that. Are you going to tell me that doesn't happen or not?
No, I mean, well, no, I've never been in a dressing room where players are down tools. That's just not something that I've ever seen. It's definitely not. It's not something that I've ever done. But I think the writing was on the wall when we played a home game, and I can't remember who it was against, but the fans started singing, "We're Nottingham Forest and we play on the floor." So I think that maybe sort of gave it a little bit of a forward nudge to the owners that Alex McLeish probably wasn't the right person that they appointed.
So Billy Part 2 is the next manager to come in. Every player that I've spoken to absolutely loves Billy, and I guess you're probably going to tell me the same sort of thing in terms of coaching, organisation, man management, but he obviously has some flaws as well. What's your verdict on Billy in general?
Yeah, I'm not going to be too much different, I don't think. Loved him, thought he was amazing to work for, very intense, just very didn't know really what you were going to get every day, so kept everybody on their toes. But as a coach, top coach, very intense. Like I say, he wanted you to work as hard as possible, believed everything he said, got everybody else believing exactly what he's saying was gospel pretty much. So he was very good, but his paranoia probably, it doesn't help him somewhere along the line. So, but he got us doing what he thought we were really good at, and he got us back on track pretty much.
Yeah, one of the previous episodes we did on here was about what it's like to be a manager, and I think it was Frank Clark and Paul Hart were on, and Frank said, and Paul said it more than once, every manager's paranoid to some degree. Did Billy take that to the nth degree, and really that was really hyped up with Billy then?
Oh God, yeah. I get that. I get the paranoia bit, but I think you can go in a completely different, far away mind than what is probably expected of you. So, whereas Billy was, it was kind of like everyone was out to get him, which sometimes can actually not be a bad thing, because you're always on your game. Then it's not, you never rest on your laurels a little bit. He was always that intense that he always felt that somebody was talking about him, or somebody was talking about his players, or somebody was talking about the football club, or whatever it was, and it was wrong, and he was going to prove them right, and that sort of thing. So sometimes paranoia is not a bad thing, but taking it a little bit too far with Billy sometimes.
Did that manifest itself in any weird ways, or was it just kind of a general theme with Billy that he always was kind of on the edge a little bit, or not?
We played Burnley away, and he ended up getting the press secretary at the time to film the press, because somebody previously had written something that Billy hadn't said. So he needed to make sure that what he was saying was written in the press or portrayed in the press the next day or the next week or whatever. So that was the way that he had control of the press as well. And, ultimately he didn't have a bad time at Forest. And, but I think sometimes it does sort of lead to his demise a little bit.
On the pitch that season, you were so close to making the playoffs. I think it went down to the final game against Leicester, didn't it? When Billy did that weird thing of doing his press conference before the game. I don't know if the players even remember that or not, but did you feel like you were a bit unlucky not to get into the top 6 that season?
Yeah, I think it started with the Sean O'Driscoll sort of sacking, where we were in a decent position. We weren't, we'd lost a couple of games, but we weren't in a free fall at all. Then obviously Alex came in, and it was over the sort of Christmas period. Then Billy came in, and we got back on track. We just started to draw a few too many games, and then it was we sort of found that momentum that little bit too late, and it was like the Burnley game where I think we drew 2-2. I think it was. We were 2-1 down, and we got a penalty. Lewis scored in the last few minutes, a penalty. But that last game, I remember the meeting a couple of days before, and Billy, it was like me, Dex, Darius Henderson, Matt Derbyshire, and maybe I can't remember who the other one was. And Billy was like, "Listen, I'm going to reinvent hell for leather. I'm gonna throw on every single one of you. If we need it, I'm putting every single one of you on, and we're going to go back to front, and we're going to cause absolute carnage." And I think we were all on the bench as well, or some started, some were on the bench, and I just remember like last few minutes. We needed to win to get into the playoffs, and was it 2-2? I think the game in the end, and I just remember like at the end of the game seeing like 5 or 6 of forwards on the pitch, and you just like going, "Oh my God," we were like all over the place. But I can understand that he needed to win to get in there, and I think one thing that he would have been good at is playoffs. He would have got, they are one-off games, and putting a one-off game into like a 46 game season, I think it would have been right up his alley, because I think he would have got us over the line as well.
Yeah, he'd lost a couple, hadn't he? So you'd hope he'd learn from it, certainly. You scored, I think you got like 14 or 15 goals for Forest, and there were some good ones in amongst them. And I guess every interview you do, and probably every conversation you have in the pub, involves the goal against Birmingham where McGugan clips it in and you take it down. You kind of take a touch and lob it in the same motion almost. I mean, was that the best goal of your career? Just talk us through it.
Yeah, I think so. I think anybody who sort of ever searches me or if I speak to someone who doesn't know me and then goes and searches me, I think that's one of the first thing that sort of comes up, really. But it was just one of those goals that it just came from such a distance. And listen, every Forest fan will remember that I'm not the quickest person in the world, but somehow I got in front of their back line or in behind their back line, and I was stretching so much that I don't know, maybe it was the sort of touch that happened, and then obviously Jack Butland sort of rushing out. I was able to. I think he sort of made my mind up, because I think if he had stayed in goal, God, I probably wouldn't even have scored. So yeah, I think the ball over the top, obviously a great ball, and the touch sort of set up the goal, and because of who's in goal, and future England international at the time, and it was just such a nice goal to have. I would loved it to have been in the sort of 89th, 91st minute for a winner, because I think it would have been probably talked about for a lot longer than it did. But ultimately it got us a point, and it was a point that we probably needed at the time as well.
Like I said, McGugan passes you the ball. I always find him one of the most fascinating players, because he was so talented. He scored ridiculous goals, but his career had petered out by the time he was like 29. I don't think he's played for 3 or 4 years now. What was he like to play with? I've heard some people say he was lazy, and others say that's not a fair reflection of him. What was your experience of him?
I think he was a maverick player. He was one that you needed to allow the freedom of the pitch to do. He wasn't somebody you could rely on to sit as a sort of sitting midfield player, or defensively you wouldn't probably count on him too much. But the other way going forward, he was, you could allow him to do whatever he liked. Lazy, I don't think is a true reflection of him. I think he just, I think if somebody would have been able to get hold of him and say, listen, you've got the ability to go right to the top. Because I remember him even before I joined Forest, being talked about when he was at England, underage levels and stuff, and being talked about playing in the Premier League and stuff. And you could easily have seen it, but maybe his work rate, or maybe somebody not just getting hold of him and saying, look, the reason you're not in there at the minute is because of this. So if you do this and you sort of live right, then maybe it was that he maybe just, kind of didn't have it in him. I don't know. But listen, lovely lad, like really good player, but probably a career that he'll look back on and just say, if I'd have done that, or what if I'd have done that, maybe I would have had a better career.
Are players like that frustrating at the time when you can see the talent, or do you have to kind of have a degree of acceptance? Because every team has a bit of a maverick amongst them, like Forest have had Collymore in the past and people like that. Does there have to be a degree of acceptance, or do you find yourself tearing your hair out at them not delivering what they can?
I've not got much hair left. No, I think it is frustrating because the ability that he has or had, if he's even retired, I don't know, but the ability that he had when I was with him, you could see there's a player in him. It was just that sometimes I've seen this loads of times. You end up wanting it more for them than they actually want it for themselves, which is ludicrous, because I've seen so many players get to the top purely based on hard work, not necessarily on ability alone. If you can get the ability to work alongside hard work, it's a marriage made in heaven. So he just needed that, possibly that arm around the shoulder, or maybe even a little bit of tough love. If he would have bought into that sort of thing, then he would have definitely been a player to have looked out for in the Premier League, 100%.
If we start looking at like your second season at the club, then what was the kind of expectation and hope that you had going into that second season, having come close with half a season under Billy? Were you pretty optimistic going into the 2013-2014 season? Yeah,
absolutely. We had a really good pre-season. Billy and his coaching staff believed 100% that we would win the league. And he got us believing that. And I think one of our first ever meetings when we came back from, or leading up to the first game of the season, was if we won the first 10 games of the season, which they believed we could have done, you straight onto 30 points when everybody else is on, 10, 12, 15 points, whatever. You can just basically cruise along to the finish line and say, thanks very much. We've done it the easy way. And we believed that was possible. It never worked out that way, but, and then all of a sudden, possibly things started to unravel because it wasn't happening the way that he wanted it to. And things started to, start to fall away a little bit.
The squad did change, not too dramatically. You added, I've got a list of who you added here. I mean, you players like Patterson, De Vries, Abdoud, Mackie, Kelvin Wilson, Jabor, Jacobs, and Danny Fox came in. Is that a mixture of lads in terms of quality and character there? What was that influx like?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at even just some of the names there, Jamie Mackie, obviously hard working, been in the Premier League, you think good signing. I've known him now for a long time. Jack Hobbs from Leicester, just one of those stalwart defenders. Kelvin Wilson, bringing back from his time up at Celtic, you thought, big signing that to come back. You thought, right, we've now got a good nucleus of experienced players that will help us along the way. And then what you probably didn't realise is that there was probably another 20 lads in the dressing room who also felt that they could do a job, and having a really big squad as what we did at the time probably wasn't something that we needed, and we probably needed to get rid of a few to allow the likes of who you've just mentioned in the door, so that we could have a good sort of harmonious dressing room, really.
What was Abdoun like? Because a former colleague of mine had a few run-ins with him. He rang him up once and started talking about the size of his balls, I remember, because he'd been dropped. And he said, I've got big balls. I'll prove it to you. I'm the best player in this club. And I think the story goes that he told you all he was the best player at the club in front of everyone. And I don't know if that's true or not. What was he like?
Yeah. Do you know what? Like, some days you'd be amazed at some of the things he did, like on the training pitch, on the ball and stuff. Like he could manipulate the ball in some ways that others could only dream of. But I think it was just one of those that he had that ability to be able to just down tools himself. Like, if it wasn't going his way, or somebody kicked him, or the tackle went in on him, that was him. He was finished with, and you might as well have just sent him in, because he was done for the rest of the day, or even in a game. And you can see from sometimes in the games where if things aren't going right, he fling his arms in the air, and I mean, it just wasn't something that we needed in the dressing room. But I think anybody who would tell you that he probably wasn't, well, him and Rafiq weren't Billy signings. They were Fawaz's mates, or players at Fawaz, or someone had told Fawaz to sign, so he signed them, and it was just, that was the way it went. So it just wasn't something that we needed at the club at the time.
What went wrong then, do you think, for Billy in the second spell? Because you ended up, I think he was gone by the March. You lost to Derby after, I think it was like 8 defeats in a row. Did it just feel like it was all unraveling a bit towards the end with Billy, or not?
Yeah, a little bit. I think he just, again, like I say, I think he lost his way a little bit. I think he expected us to be doing a lot better than we were. And as I said, with the amount of players that we brought in, I think sometimes the injuries and things like that weren't helping us. Kelvin, was never really fit enough to play a sustained amount of time. Like the Derby game, obviously that's the one that, no matter who, how well you're doing in the league at the time, that's the one you always look at, and that can rejuvenate you, or ultimately sometimes cost you your job. And that was the one thing that sort of happened with Billy. We sort of went into that game not on the back of a great run, and had we sort of won that game, he probably would have got another couple of games, and had we gone on a run, he would have probably stayed in his job. But because we got beaten, well and truly beaten, there was probably really no coming back for him from that.
What was Gary Brazil like, the last manager, caretaker you played for? He brought in young lads like Brereton and Ben Osborne, and sort of a bit of a changing of the guard as they went in a different direction. What was he like for experienced pros like yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I remember sitting down with Gary, and like the first time, and he was like, look, I want you to go back to what you were when you first came in. It was in the box, it was running in behind and stuff like that. And I was just in a really sort of, not in a bad place, but I was just sort of mentally and physically tired from probably what had gone on before. And he brought in the likes of Ben Osborne and people like that, all people that he'd had in the youth team. And listen, they were young at the time, and they've obviously, a lot of them have gone on to have decent careers, but it just didn't feel like that was the right thing to be doing. But he knew them, he trusted them. He probably didn't trust and like a lot of the players that were in the team at the time. So it like you said, it was a bit of a change in the guard. But we just, I think we just needed somebody to come in, and I don't think too many of the players had sort of worked under Gary before, or known Gary too much before, so we didn't really know what we were getting. But we all already knew that Stuart Pearce was sort of coming in, so we knew that Gary wasn't going to be there for that long, and Stuart Pearce was coming in anyway. So it was a case of we were fine till the end of the season. We had a couple of games left and of the season, a few games left, few months left, and it was, we'll go again next year.
I think you end up leaving that summer. I mean, from what you're saying about feeling a bit, mentally jaded and everything, did it feel like the right time to go, or was it did it go down a different way and you actually wanted to stay? What was the story behind going?
I turned up that pre-season on the back of having a good off season, and I came back in and I was really like having a really good go at it, and I was quite excited about being part of this season. Obviously, Forest legend, everything else, Stuart Pearce, England international, all that sort of stuff. And I was doing really well pre-season, and I felt like I was back to what I needed. And I had a conversation with Stuart probably after about a week or 2 weeks of pre-season, and I said, look, I've got a year left on my contract. I like it here. I'm excited about what you're doing. Is it something that you want? Would we be able to sit down and talk about a new deal and things like that? And he said, look, I'm still analysing the squad, so on and so on, which I was fine with. And then we go into play pre-season game against West Brom at the City Ground, and I get pulled into a little room in the stadium. And he says, look, you're not going to play today, and you're not going to play this year, so I want you to be part of the Mikel Antonio deal from Sheffield Wednesday to here. I want you to go the other way. And I just hit rock bottom then. That was me. I was like, whoa, like how can I go from sort of flying in pre-season to basically being shoved out the door? And I obviously left the ground, went home, and just, I was just in a bad way that day.
Do you at that moment think, are you angry? Are you thinking, what have I done wrong? I mean, like you say, if you feel like you're flying, it must have hit you like a bullet between the eyes type thing, mustn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I was expecting, him to turn around and say, being brought into that room, I thought he was going to turn around and go, listen, you've been doing really well. We're going to get you a new deal, so on and whatever. But then to be told you're no longer sort of required at the football club, and we want you to be a bit part of another player coming in, it literally hit me like a ton of bricks. And I remember sort of going home and just, not breaking down, but I just sat there and just went, wow, how on earth did that sort of, like, that was like a complete 360 turn. Like, my career is now, where do I go from here? Got rid of the game on the Monday, walked in, and I turned around to him and said, no, I'm not going to be part of that deal, because you get the player that you want. They don't potentially want me. And then all of a sudden, if I signed a 2 or 3 year contract with Sheffield Wednesday, they might not want me after 6 months, and I'm in the exact same position. So it makes no sense. I said, if I'm going to leave this football club, I'm going to go somewhere where I want to go, and somewhere who wants me. So that's kind of like how that one played out, really. And then obviously I got onto the phone to my agent and everything else, and I ended up going back to my hometown club at Reading.
Is that a hard conversation to have with a guy like Stuart Pearce? Because I think I'd be, we don't swear on this podcast, but I'd be pretty nervous going into that room to speak to someone of his character and say, actually, this isn't happening. How did that go down?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was just because I looked at it as, well, you've just basically told me my career at this football club is over, so I'm going in and telling you point blank that I'm not going to help you out in any way. Because you want one player, you don't want me, which is fine. I'll go somewhere where I want to go, not where you want me to go, and that's just how it sort of went, really. Nothing really. It wasn't a long drawn out conversation. It was pretty quick, and yeah. I mean, I left after he told me that. I probably left about 5 or 6 days later.
Does Forest overall feel like a bit of a case of what might have been for you then? Because it sounds like you perhaps the manager wasn't right for you at one point, and then you get excited to work with a legend like Stuart Pearce, and you're not for him, and you scored 15 goals. But do you feel like maybe, if things had panned out differently, you might have scored 25 goals and Forest might have got promoted? Is there some kind of regret looking back there?
I think I would have loved to have signed a new deal under Billy. I think had my contract been coming to an end at the season that Billy sort of took over and sort of going into, is it 13-14 season, I probably would have signed a new 2 or 3 year contract and been at Forest for another couple of years, and that would have been, I would have really enjoyed my time. But yeah, I just think change of ownership, change of managers, all that sort of stuff, multiple players in and out the door every season, every January. It really does become a bit tiring. So I just tried to do the best I could, and sometimes I just would love to have somebody to come in and, similar to Lewis, have somebody put your arm around you and say, listen, you're doing really well, or I need you to do this a little bit more, and have that sort of manager who looks after you a little bit. And sometimes it might be that bit of tough love, but especially under Billy, I remember, I end up sometimes playing right wing, and that was purely and simply because he knew that I would work really hard for him, and that was, I could see under him that I was really enjoying my football, regardless of the goals, but the terms of performances and the levels that we were at, it was just something that I really enjoyed. Then obviously he started to unravel, then 2 or 3 managers later, and then you're out the door, and it's just I kind of wish it would have gone a different way, but football's football and people move on, and that's just the way it works.
Do you think sometimes fans don't appreciate that a move sometimes doesn't work out, or a player can be struggling? Not saying your moves didn't work out, but sometimes fans don't appreciate what's going on behind the scenes. I suppose I'm thinking of someone like Rhian Brewster at the moment, who's obviously a very talented player, and it's not happening for him. Do fans sometimes have to bear in mind a player could be carrying an injury, he could have stuff going on in his personal life, he could have a manager who doesn't fancy him, stuff like that? Do we as fans need to always have that in the back of our minds? Yeah,
but I don't think you'd ever have that in the back of your mind, though. When you bring somebody into a football club, you kind of expect them to do what they've been brought in to do, regardless of injuries, personal life. They're not seen in that way. They're seen as footballers. They're seen as somebody to produce what they're sort of paid really well to do. Whereas I think sometimes when fans meet players, they actually get to understand, if the player is a little bit forthcoming in explaining why things aren't going well, whether that be personally or collectively, fans actually turn around and go, oh, right, okay, so I understand now. Instead of sort of sitting around and around other people and sort of having their opinions and stuff, and then all of a sudden it sort of escalates a little bit further than what actually is happening, in that person or in that dressing room.
You had plenty of good years after leaving Forest. You went, like you say, your hometown club, Reading. You played a lot of games for Southend, and then you finished in Australia. Would you, as a 15-year-old kid, have taken this career? You played for Ireland, obviously, as well, and West Brom. Is this as good as it could have gone for you, do you think? Do you have any regrets? And if you could go back, would you do it all again?
I don't regret anything. I feel like that's something that I would never do. I've been lucky and fortunate enough to play for some amazing football clubs and for some amazing managers. But listen, ultimately, if it could have gone a little bit differently, you just never know. But I always like to think to myself that I tried my hardest in every game that I had. I never tried to miss. I always tried to score, and it was never something that, sometimes you hit purple patches and sometimes you don't. And would I go and do it all again? Absolutely. Would I make a different decision? Who knows? I feel I'm always happy and content in the decisions I made throughout my career. So I'm pretty happy with the if I was a 15-year-old self again, I'd be saying if you could have that sort of 17-year career, I'd enjoy it again, I think.
What's the plan for you now then? Is it coaching, management, media, running a pub? What are you going to do?
If I run a pub, I don't think I'd be here that long. So I've got my own little small coaching thing going, which is nice. It's sort of locally, try and deal with young up and coming kids, as well as dealing with some players who potentially haven't got clubs at the minute, or injury, and they're coming back from their injuries and they need a little bit extra work, or people looking for moves in January, just helping them out as best I can. Sometimes it's nice to give a second set of eyes over what they're doing, and a different voice, which is, you know, something I probably would have really enjoyed if it was around when I was playing. But the sort of main goal is to get into management, get into coaching at the elite level, whether that be, you know, first team level or academy level. You know, I think some stage I would love to be a manager, but, you know, I understand that I have to earn my stripes and start at the bottom somewhere, and just trying to get in is hard. So wherever that is, I'm open to, as well as trying to do a little bit of media stuff, which I don't mind doing either.
Does management not scare you at all? I think it would scare me. You know, as soon as anything goes wrong, you lose 4 games, like Dean Smith at Villa at the moment, for example, and you're probably out on your ear. I mean, you're handsomely rewarded financially, I'm sure, but it's not an easy job, is it? Does that not put you off at all?
No, because I think, one, I'd sort of like to think that you sort of set yourself out like it wouldn't go wrong. Why would it go wrong?
Yeah.
But you understand that that there is obviously going to be some tough times in there. But I think it's consistency. It's consistency in your message. It's making sure that the players, you know, buy into what you're doing, and understanding why you're doing it, the process of how you get to the top, and, you know, being a good man manager, because I've played for some who are good man managers, and it works out really well, and I've played for some who literally don't take an interest in you at all, and it doesn't work out. So I think that's one thing that today's managers have to be really good at, is man management. It's understanding that the players are, you know, from one to the next is a completely different person, have a completely different social life and personal life and family life and everything else. So you have to get to know them on a personal level so that you can try and get the best out of them.
So who are you modelling yourself on there as a manager? I don't mean just Forest. I mean, throughout your career, who are you taking bits from here and there to round yourself as a coach and a manager?
Well, I like I had Roy Hodgson at West Brom for a bit, and he was a very good man manager. He gave everybody 5 minutes a day, which was great. It made you feel like you had someone that you could openly talk to. So that's a good start. And obviously, he went on to his 70s, so it's not a bad managerial career to sort of follow. But I love the sort of Jurgen Klopp, Pep Guardiola sort of thing. And I know that's like top managers you're sort of looking at here, but it just shows that they love playing for their managers. They understand a lot of their players. They understand why they do what they do, and they explain it in such detail that there's no grey areas, but they don't take any fools in terms of what, if you're not doing it, you don't play. That's it. You either do it and you play, or you don't do it and you get out, because there's no middle ground here. And it's not a dictatorship, but it's something that you have to get them to understand. This is the reason we're doing it, because if we're going to be the best, we have to do it this way.
Just lastly then, to finish, I guess, am I right saying Reading's your club, I suppose you would say, would it?
I'd say so, yeah.
I mean, do you still keep tabs on Forest and your other clubs, and always kind of wish them well in the back of your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. Always. One of my good friends is one of the coaches at Forest at the time, at this minute, Stephen Reed. So, but obviously when he went in under Chris Hughton, I was like, like really happy for him. But then obviously it didn't really work out too well for Chris. But he still stayed there under the new management. And it's listen, Forest is a massive football club and someone that shouldn't really be in the Championship, but it is, and it probably will be for another couple of seasons until somebody gets it going. And if Steve Cooper is that man, then great, and you know, good times ahead, and 30,000 people singing at the City Ground every weekend or every other weekend is something that I always really enjoyed. It's you know, it makes for a great atmosphere. It makes for a great buzz around the city. So yeah, it's always someone. It's definitely. I mean, I look out for all my clubs, and want them all to do well, apart from when they play each other. So yeah, it is something that you sort of look out for and wish them well every season, which is good.
What's Stephen Reid like? I don't think fans know much about him. He did a bit of media around the time when Chris Hughton left, but and fans seem to like him a lot because he got that win at Huddersfield and changed formation and everything. But what's Stephen Reid like as a person then?
Good, yeah, great guy. Intense, wants it done properly. Expects the players to buy in and expects the players to do it properly because he did it properly as a player. And he's got presence as well, which is something that managers definitely need. He's got that sort of stand there on the touchline and bark out orders, and when he talks, you listen, and he's got that friendly side, which is great, and he'll be your mate and everything else. But when you need to be told, he'll tell you in no uncertain terms, which, you know, sometimes people need. So he's definitely a manager in waiting, whether that be at Forest or whether that be somewhere else. And he's learned under some top managers as well. He was at Burnley, learned under Sean Dyche. He obviously had Roy, Steve Clarke as well. So, you know, he's learned under a lot of decent managers. So I'd be excited for wherever he goes in at whatever stage. I'd be excited to see how he does.
Great stuff. Well, we shall leave it there. Thanks very much for everyone who listens along as ever, and do give us a good rating and do subscribe on iTunes or YouTube. Simon, thanks very much for giving us so much of your time. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure, no problem.
And we shall be back next week. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for listening to Garibaldi Red, a Nottingham Forest podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please let us know. We love hearing your feedback. We'll be back soon with another episode. Thanks for listening.